Part 2. The Master's Message. The wonder that I feel is easy, yet ease is cause of wonder. Therefore, speak. T.S. Eliot. Chapter 1. He spoke. As anyone might expect, the Master's presence is awesome. I was also privileged to know how human, warm, caring, and even harmonious he can be. Until recently, however, that was an untold aspect of my experience with him, even though it was the best part for me. The unique and wonderful aspect about a visitation which lasted for more than 4 months is that there was enough time to be personal, to share, and to become acquainted in the way that friends do. In this conscious and caring communion, we had many conversations about topics large and small. Altogether, it was more than I could share with others for more than 4 years, so I regarded our communion as simply his private gift to me. When anyone would ask me for deeper insights about the visitation, I would just say, love is what it's all about. From time to time, I would mention to my husband, Brian, and others that Jesus and I had exchanged some bits of communication. That seemed to fit with the scope of their expectations, for after all, if a vision could be so alive and so enduring as to sit for a portrait, then why wouldn't there also be some measure of communion which could be translated into words? That was their logic, and so I left well enough alone, preferring to let a blanket of silence conceal the fact that we had extensive conversations during our time together. Once the floodgate was open, I knew there would be no stopping the questions that would pour through it. Most especially, what did he say? However, in the spring of 1996, Jesus appeared to me again and asked me to speak. There is a staggering responsibility that goes along with relaying his words. There are a number of good reasons why I had been reluctant to bring his messages into a public forum. In the first place, they were presented as a subjective response to my inquiries, issues, and pursuits. The questions I asked were, in many ways, a mirror of my soul, and his answers were often directed to the core of my being. It has taken 4 years of distance from the point of subjective impact for me to think upon his words with any objective detachment. It is also not my desire to filter his presence for you, or to tell you what to think about him. I am currently not a theologian. It is my hope that I can clearly relay his messages as if they were spoken to you in the first person. Then you can interpret them as you will. They can touch your heart and mind in a manner appropriate to your understanding of him or your relationship to him. For this reason, I have chosen to present all of his words in italics. That way you may understand them in their original context or separate them, if you wish, from any nuance or meaning cast upon them from my side of the equation. Above all, I recommend that you receive these messages through the heart, and remember always, this was a conversation, not a dissertation. He was not composing a new scripture, neither was he delivering a new Sermon on the Mount. He was simply talking to a friend. Like any normal conversation, ours would have many ramifications. One thing would lead to several other related topics without prescribed agenda as the drift carried it and as our hearts directed. The conversations grew in power, length, and intensity as our relationship developed over that period of time. I have harvested the jewels from it, and, hopefully, if I have strung the pearls together well, his words will provide you a personal message which is greater than the sum of its parts. It was only with respectful restraint that I ever asked anything at all. I did not want to take advantage of his position. He had honored me enough just by being present, and I did not want to assume rights that might not exist, to pry into subjects or areas of knowledge that were not mine to pursue. As a measure of that respect, I waited for him to initiate all conversations in the beginning. The first thing he ever said to me was, "Glenda, love is who you are." At that moment, I had no idea how important his statement was or how central it would be to everything he would say. For the time being, I was just content to hear his voice. It was baritone, rich and melodious, full and manly. The sound of his voice was so deeply nurturing and satisfying that I felt like the biblical woman at the well. It was like clear water that quenched my thirst. Hearing it was enough. How often do we read and seek only to find ourselves even more thirsty? Not with him. He could speak one word, and I was quite content. There was no need to supplement his words with other readings or to ask endless questions. Even though I often felt like a child in his presence, the feeling never extended to the point of regarding him as a daddy whose patience could be tried with childish curiosities. You might be thinking, "Glenda, you could have asked the secrets of the universe." Eventually I did, but for the most part it was enough to know the one who had mastered the universe. Why did I need to ask anything? His presence brought with it a wonderful serenity and contentment that kept me always at peace. At first, I was afraid that I would not be able to work in his presence and still be absorbed in my typical studio routine. Art is a process which goes best when the artist surrenders to random and unpredictable possibilities. Frankly, the physical side of an artist's environment is often less than tidy, although stronger adjectives than that may appropriately describe my workspace. How could I roll out the red carpet and still be my usual creative, sloppy self? Miraculously, Jesus made that possible. I suppose he considered it his first task to make me comfortable enough to do my job, which was to produce the painting. It was necessary that I be able to paint in my normal way, and he assumed responsibility for that. He took pleasure in the things I enjoyed, was patient with my coffee breaks, amused himself with my procedures, and often made polite suggestions as to how I might do it better. He made me feel pretty, even though I usually wore blue jeans and sweatshirts, often had smears of oil paint on my face instead of makeup, and smelled of turpentine instead of roses. A perfect gentleman. He was kind, thoughtful, and relaxed. Never in his presence did I feel deficient. At the same time, he led me to heights of perception, understanding, and inspiration which would have been inconceivable only days before, all with a grace and ease that made it seem so natural. From the very beginning, I was in awe of how well he mastered the small as well as the large, the least thing, the simplest courtesy, the tiniest observation were all important to him. Actually, our conversations began with one small observation which was quite humbling to me. That first day, as I was drawing my initial sketch, I was sitting very close to the canvas, perhaps a foot away, because my eyesight was less than optimum. In the last few years, I had become nearsighted, but I did not want to admit it. It was a condition I had decided to tolerate as long as possible because my love for visual beauty was too pure to have it filtered through ground glass. If I could have persuaded the highway department to renew my driver's license, then I would have had the problem well in hand. But Jesus saw me straining and said, "Glenda, are you having some trouble with your eyes?" I deflected the question, not wanting to answer it fully. So I remarked, "I've just been having some eye strain lately from my nervousness, and I didn't get much sleep last night, the excitement and all." It bothered me, however, as I wasn't being completely truthful. Later that night, Brian asked me how the day went, and I said, "Oh, it was wonderful." I don't have the words to describe it, but I have to confess I feel a little guilty about one thing. He asked me a question which I didn't answer honestly. I explained what happened, and despite all consolations, there was no containing my nervousness about still having the same problem the next day when I would see Jesus again. I can't face him, I told myself. So I went out to be fitted for glasses, and the subject was never mentioned again. When I first donned my new glasses next week, I noticed he gently and courteously looked at me, just smiling as we got on with the day's work. It was not until a couple of weeks after the painting was finished that I discovered a miracle had happened. As I straightened my desk, there were those glasses, abandoned beneath layers of clutter. It's possible that I wore them once or twice, but somewhere in the course of being in his presence, the affliction was healed. The reason I hadn't noticed it until that moment was that in his presence, everything was always perfect. There were no negative standards for measuring or exposing deficiencies. A few weeks later, when I went to get my driver's license, my eye test revealed that I had 20/20 vision without the glasses. I never wore them again. If I had to regard anything as the crowning jewel of his message, it would be the rulership of the heart. So many times he would say, "Remember, Glenda, you are love." He would then proceed to give me greater understanding of the heart's importance. His first comment to me about the heart triggered another response of embarrassment. We were only 2 or 3 days into the painting, and I was trying to make small talk with him, mostly to put myself at ease. In my years as a portraitist, I had learned the importance of creating a comfort zone by directing attention away from the sitting. In relation to my esteemed guest, however, the pursuit of trivia seemed utterly inappropriate, so I nervously rebounded to the opposite mode of trying to impress him. I shared with him a color wheel, which is my original own design. During my college years, I had expanded my curriculum to include physics as well as art in order to pursue the subject of optics and to understand color more fully as light. From that pursuit, I developed an advanced color theory which had given me a nice little professional edge. This was a formula which had served me well and has given a unique flavor to my paintings. Most people who knew about it were impressed, and those who didn't understand it just got quiet or a little defensive. He simply looked at me, a bit sad. I was stunned with his silence. How could I respond to a feather wall, a point of no resistance? After a while, he asked, "Glenda, what is it about color that frightens you?" It was like an arrow that went straight through the veil, right into my heart. No one had ever seen through me in that area about which I felt so confident. No one had ever seen through my defenses. He had burst my bubble. I sat there almost in tears because I had been seen so clearly. I groped for words. "Why did you say that?" "Well, your mind is working overtime to compensate for something with which you are clearly uncomfortable. You do not have to know in order to love, for love is the power." Exposed in my vulnerability, I struggled to explain. "It's just that I love light and color so much, I never felt I could do them justice. The beauties of the universe thrill me to the core, and I feel inadequate in their presence." He assured me I had accomplished more by expressing the passions of my heart and releasing my fear than I could have ever done through mental comprehension. He went on to say how the mind will look for troubles of the heart as fertile ground for dominating it. The mind will actively seek to compensate or to exploit the heart's troubles, but it will never seek to remove or to cure them, for the heart's despair is the mind's option for power. Is the mind always that way? I queried. Well, often. But actually, the mind can be a very good servant if you allow it to be just that. You must realize and hold firmly to an understanding that the mind has no power of its own. The mind either integrates and projects from experience, or else it develops a logical matrix to serve, to explain, and to implement the powers of the heart and the soul. The problem arises when the heart is oriented negatively in some way toward life. Because when the heart gives the mind a negative impulse, such as insufficiency, insecurity, fear, or anger, the mind operates with reverse logic. We have all seen that work, but at the moment I couldn't think of any examples, so I asked him for one. The most obvious example is simply the absence of data or experience, a tangible mystery, which the mind fills with its own inventions for fear of losing control. But now, let's look at this. When a man's heart has become attuned to scarcity, his mind will work overtime to generate ways and means of making money. There's a certain logic to this in relation to survival pressures, but it never solves the problem or changes the basic belief. The man just copes or grows rich to finance and perpetuate poverty consciousness in himself or others. And so he overworks to support a kind of material wealth, which dominates his life but never results in a deep and true sense of prosperity. There is only compensation for lack, for the mind only solves problems of logic or balance, never problems of life. The man's poverty consciousness resulted from wearing so many blinders to the abundance of life that he eventually believed in scarcity and then invested in it. Now, by comparison, there was another man who beheld the wondrous universe with awe as he expressed his gratitude for the infinite supply. This man has given his mind a positive impulse, and so his mind will seek ways to make that abundance real in his life. With less effort, greater prosperity is attained. The same is true of physical well-being. A man who believes in illness will struggle all of his life to be well, and his mind will provide him many ways to prevent or to remedy the ailments without ever removing the source of trouble. Yet a man who believes in health and wholeness will set his mind to the positive service of making it true. Given any negative belief or impulse, the mind will operate dysfunctionally. There may be perfect logic, but applied in reverse mode, as if reflected by a mirror, to compensate for, not solve, the problem. Then, with a sense of wonder, he looked around and out and said, "My Father's universe is infinite and infinitely abundant. By beholding and believing in this, the mind can then work in a direct and proper way to bring abundance. If given a positive impulse, the mind works properly. If given a negative impulse, the mind works in reverse. That is its logic. Just behold infinity. Behold and be in awe of the infinite, everlasting creation." Then he recited one of my favorite passages from the New Testament. "Consider the lilies of the field. They do not labor or spin. Yet I tell you, not even Solomon in all his splendor was arrayed like one of these. Behold infinity every day, and all that you seek shall be given you. Never before had I seen such beauty in that passage. He had been extremely generous with his information, but I needed to ask one more thing in order to make better sense out of what he had already said. So I ventured to inquire, how does the mind relate to the soul? The soul is the totality of your love, awareness, experience, ability, memory, emotions, and potential, which comprise your immortality. Your mind is the recorder and administrator. In this capacity, the mind is a useful and important asset to your existence. But it was never built to be the commander. The mind has no power of its own, and it can't alter basic conditions. At the center of your soul is the sacred heart. This is the point at which you are one with God. The heart sees infinity within and without. It can behold perfection. It can ascertain the origin of conditions and change them. The heart is your higher intelligence. It is centered in a viewpoint of infinity established by your Creator. Thus, the heart honors your individuality, the oneness of God, and the integrated unity of all that is. Would you like to know something fun to do at sunrise and sunset? Sure. Find a place where you can watch the sun rise or set. Be careful not to look straight into the sun until it hits the cusp of the horizon or is filtered by the atmospheric densities at the Earth's edge. But once it is orange and comfortable to watch, you will find at its center an infinity point which will resonate with the infinity point in your own soul, and this will give you much nourishment and positive awareness, even to the point of biological nourishment. It will actually assist in the manufacture of vitamins and the utilization of minerals. This reminded me that primitive man revered the sun, even to the point of deifying it. His response was to the point. Primitive man recognized the life-giving powers of the sun, although he did not know how to properly regard it. It was a mistake to worship the sun or any other created thing. However, it is not a mistake to recognize the presence of infinity within creation. The sun is a powerful display of infinity. Another inspiring display is the starlit sky, or the vastness of an ocean viewed from the high seas. Many times he reminded me to contemplate infinity every day, inwardly as well as outwardly. One day I asked, "How do you contemplate it inwardly?" Infinity is not a subject limited to vast spaces or even to immeasurably small ones. Infinity is not about quantity at all. It's actually about quality. Let me tell you about your heart. This was early on and was to be the cornerstone of much that he would teach me. The heart of which I speak is not the physical organ, although the physical organ is an appropriate symbol for the true heart, because the physical organ nourishes your body with lifeblood every moment. The heart of which I speak is the central focus point of your very soul. It is the lens through which your soul integrates all of your earthly emotions and all of your divine awareness into a focused point of infinite integrity. This point is on the threshold of your physical existence, at a point slightly below and behind your physical heart. Then he said, "Locate it." When I did, it was as if my whole framework just vibrated and pulsed with energy. There was a sense of life within me, and it required no thought to move into that point. Simply focusing upon it and being aware of its existence was empowering. This is the source of power your Creator has established within you, not your mind. Your mind is merely a servant, and it behaves well if it is given positive impulses. It behaves very poorly if it is given negative impulses. The heart generates all of the earthly emotions as well as the blissful emotions of the higher realms. But it is so much more than just emotion. It is infinite awareness and the basis of all the higher consciousness you will ever assimilate. It is from this power, within the center of your being, that the entire script of your life is written. Live in your heart, not your mind, to fulfill the script of your life or to rewrite it. Your mind is powerless to bring that about, but every desire of your heart will be fulfilled. He then mentioned something that seemed to be a historical event, although perhaps it was metaphorical. I don't know, and perhaps it doesn't matter. There was a time when the heart was so distraught with life that the mind was spinning in upon itself with contradictions and chaos generated by the heart's negative impulses. The servant mind attempted mutiny over the master heart because survival demanded that the servant mind at least be logical. Clearly, the heart was in trouble, and the mind was of no help. But, to save itself, the mind accused the heart of betrayal. Then the servant mind set out to get along with the heart by generating its own reality. The mind wanted only to be logical, and so it sought for control over circumstances that were incomprehensible to it. From the viewpoint of the mind, control and understanding are one and the same. The mind assumes that it understands whatever it controls. This is the central problem, the eye of the storm, in a mind-dominated world, and the single most important reason to require that the mind be your servant and not your master. He said today, even as we speak, this inversion occurs in the lives of many people. But mutiny is not the answer, and substituting control for understanding will only deplete your life, leaving it stripped of richness, power, and meaning. The answers to healing your life will be found in the inner strength of your heart. Only correct understanding will accomplish this, and that requires understanding the problem for what it really is. He suggested that I earnestly practice this every day. I give you 3 practices. The first is to strengthen all of your positive emotions through daily gratitude and admiration. The second is to disempower your negative emotions daily through forgiveness. The third practice you will have to work a little more diligently, but Glenda, I think this will come more easily for you than for some people because you practice this already as an artist. I'm referring to innocent perception. What do you mean? Okay, look out the window. Now look back at me and tell me immediately what you saw. I saw 5 branches and there were 4 birds on the wall. Also, there were 2 little twigs on the window sill, along with some bird droppings. Good. That was innocent perception. You simply told me like a child what you saw. This is what children do so well. They just perceive and respond without preconception. This is what you did in your childhood, and you retained the ability a little better than some. Now, if the mind had answered me, the mind would probably have hesitated for just a moment while it gained control. Under the cover of hesitation, you would have blocked out what you saw, and then you might have reported to me something like this. Well, I think I saw 12 branches, 6 twigs, 3 birds, and a clean windowsill. Because the mind feels most comfortable within structure and symmetry, it tends to impose artificial order. In other words, your mind would have rewritten the script to improve upon it. The mind would have rewritten the script to try and preconceive reality, to do its own designing and redesigning of what is. This is what the complex, sophisticated mind tends to do always. It looks for idealized patterns that it can impose on existence and then call them divine when, Glenda, you do not have to do anything to make this universe divine. All you have to do is to perceive and then to regard with honor that which is already here. Behold, be grateful, and forgive that which you did not understand or control. For life is divine, it is perfect, and it naturally manifests the will of its creator. How wonderful! That message left me feeling like a child again, alive with expectation. At that moment, in his presence, everything glowed in the innocence of its native state. I could see how the mind, attempting to generate reality, had performed a tyranny upon our world. There was one moment when he strongly reinforced a similar realization. The mind generates structures as reality, and all of the oppressive structures which you experience in the world are from those mind-generated concepts. Attempting to create a perfection that doesn't need to be created because it is already there. In other words, the mind breaks things in order to fix them for a price. This includes breaking lives, breaking hearts, breaking souls, breaking relationships, and breaking wills, just to gain the upper hand through some kind of glorified structure which it presents as the answer. In such a world, dominated by mind and oppressive structures, if life would be bearable at all, the poor, sacrificial heart had to become the willing servant. The heart had to compensate for all the loveless barriers and oppressive formulas that man-generated realities had sanctioned. With such concessions by the heart, the inversion was then complete. In a world where the mind is master and heart is servant, the real powers of the heart have been long forgotten, locked behind a prison door, and forbidden the freedom of exit. In such a world, the heart is considered to be feminine, adaptive, and sentimental, a center of awareness which serves a person's emotional and creative needs only, a wife to the mind, but nothing more. He explained that this was the tragedy of our upside-down world, and that it was his gift and chosen task to come and restore the heart to its true power. When the heart is in its rightful place, the mind can then be a truly useful servant, and ironically, it becomes both brilliant and blissful. Like any servant, the mind works best within established and limited parameters. One of the indelible characteristics of the mind is that it must have at least 2 points of fixed reference in order to be operable. Thus, it simply cannot deal with infinity. On the other hand, the heart is centered around a viewpoint of infinity, and from this it draws its power to truly deal with life. When the mind serves the heart, anything is possible. Although when the heart serves the mind, there is nothing but limitation. Emotional energy will seethe and boil into restless liability. The problem was easy to observe. As I thought about the world, I saw the problem everywhere. But there was one more thing I wanted to know. You have been so clear about the heart. Would you mind also giving me a working definition of the mind? The mind is essentially composed of 2 parts. The first part is an integrating and transmitting instrument, which is basically a complex DNA computer. It centers in your brain and nervous system that actually involves every cell of your body. The second part is an electromagnetic field permeating and immediately surrounding your body. This is the primary gathering, storage, and retrieval system for all your sentient experience and thought integrations. All data in the mind is encoded mathematically and is triggered by a plus sign or a minus sign, access or entry impulse. This is why the mind will perform dualistically unless supervised by the heart. When the mind dominates, polarity is the order of the day. He explained that inversions of heart and mind also result in many social difficulties. When the mind dominates, then charity has to be an organized pursuit under the governance of structure. When this happens, human brotherhood is in a tragic state of disempowerment. But when the heart is in a proper relationship to God and the master of one's life, then charity occurs as a natural aspect of sharing. He paused reflectively and then continued. I tried so hard to get that point across to Judas, but he was a man of structure and he refused to listen. In response to his statement about Judas, I dared to ask, Jesus, please forgive me if I've crossed my boundary, but would you mind telling me why? If you knew that Judas was going to betray you, did you allow him to be in the sacred circle? What follows is one of the warmest, most brotherly stories he ever shared with me. Judas' position in the circle was chosen by my father, not by me. Actually, there is a lot to the story of Judas that was never told because after his betrayal and suicide, he was so hated by everyone that he was shunned and their hearts were not ready to forgive. I understood Judas from the very beginning. I did not know how he would betray me, and I didn't know what method he would use, but I knew it was inevitable. I also knew exactly why my father had placed us together. Actually, Judas and I grew up together. I didn't go out and choose him to be in my circle. He was my best friend as a little boy. Born to a very influential, well-educated family, Judas had all the advantages that wealth and education could bring. His family gave him all the privileges and advantages of structure available in those days, and because of that, he was destined to become an obedient servant to structure. Moreover, his mind was reinforced with academic and intellectual pursuits to the point of overshadowing his heart. Together we flowed as clear and muddy rivers side by side, but I loved him and he loved me. We played together as children. We played cowboys and Indians, well, actually, Jews and Romans. Often we played hide and seek. And when we would look for each other, I would always find him. But of course, he never found me. It was easy. I'd just look behind the largest structure, and he would be there. But I could be sitting in the middle of an open field, and he would walk right by me as if I were invisible. Nevertheless, we enjoyed life together, and because I was young and full of boyish pranks, I enjoyed showing off to Judas. As a little boy, long before anyone else saw the miracles I could perform, I would do disappearing acts for him, and sometimes I would turn dead branches into live ones just to show off. I guess it was just part of my youthful temperament. But Judas was very impressed, and from the beginning he knew I was the Messiah. He believed that with all of his heart. But of course, his idea of the Messiah was patterned after Moses or King David, a priestly king who would perform miracles of conquest and cause the world to say, "The King of Kings is here to restore Israel." The messianic prophecy was largely directed to reclaiming political power. He thought I was going to dazzle Rome with God's power the way Moses went to the Pharaoh and commanded his staff become a serpent. He expected me to bring Rome to her knees so that the armies would move out of Israel and we would have our land back. You see, Judas never really knew who I was. He just knew as far as the mind and structure would permit, and no further. As we grew up, he was always my challenge. He always let me know the degree of misunderstanding that was possible in any particular situation. That way, I could address the degree of misconception that might exist for anyone else. We were exact opposites, and so he was a very good sounding board for opposition. This is not a derogatory statement. He chose his part, and he played it well. I long ago forgave him for the pain of his actions, for without them the miracle would not have been possible. And contrary to many accusations, he most certainly did not betray me for silver, nor did he even think that he was betraying me. Judas was part of a proud and affluent family, and without doubt he would have donated the money to charity or to the synagogue. Judas was as devoted to structure as I was to God. That was the essence of our drama. As he departed from our supper room on that fateful night, I did not know exactly what he would do, but I knew he was off to do his thing. He was off to manifest his destiny, just as surely as I was prepared to manifest mine. He was the son of structure, and I was the son of God. We would surely have a showdown before the evening was over. Up to that point, we had coexisted in complementary fashion, but now the time had come for the drama to completely unfold. I don't think the way he does, but if I were to infer his intent, I would have to explain it this way. He was impatient with my non-political teachings, and he wanted to force me into a polarity so that I would take a stand against Rome. Doubtless, he formulated his plan to bring me to power, his idea of power. When he went to the Roman soldiers, he knew they would come for me, and he must have impressed them with reports of my strength, for they arrived in legion force. I presume that he expected me to show off to them as soon as I was surrounded. Perhaps I was supposed to disappear or turn the soldiers into pillars of stone or trees. Perhaps I was supposed to turn into a dove and fly away. He expected something miraculous to happen, and it did, but the miracle that happened was far too great for Judas to envision, because the miracle that happened is that I simply surrendered. No one was more shocked than Judas, and I'm sure that he killed himself not out of guilt, but out of a devastating realization that everything he had planned had gone wrong. My surrender was the one thing he never would have expected, because the mind, with its obsession for control, regards surrender as defeat. On the other hand, the heart knows its immortality, and so it can dare to surrender. The paradox of the surrendering heart, which retains its mastery, is perhaps my finest miracle. That was my purpose in being here. The rest is history. You said you forgave Judas. Did he ever accept your forgiveness? Not yet. But if he ever awakens to the truth of what happened, his return to God will have a shattering effect on the tyranny of structure in this universe. Do not condemn him, for that will only support the tyrannies which he still defends. Pray for his soul, and perhaps a miracle will happen which will be talked about until the end of time. I was glad that I had the courage to ask about Judas, for it unraveled a mystery about which I had often wondered. With a certain confidence under my belt, I dared to ask another question, though as I asked it, I realized that I had just been given the answer. I have wanted to ask about your suffering on the cross. Did your power surpass the reality of death, or did you receive its full measure and then transcend it? I realize now that you suffered death as we would, and then transcended it because only that submission and triumph could reverse the inversions of our world. You had observed our plight from a higher dimension and knew what was required. But Judas was so immersed in structure, he could only project a strategy based upon historical precedents and desperate measures. You brought to us the flame of life from a new dimension, and this was why Judas could not see what you were about to do. No servant of structure could have anticipated the real miracle. With a warm smile, he replied, "That's right. You learn well. The real miracle of my crucifixion and resurrection is that the Sacred Heart was then restored to its position of sovereignty over structure, and love claimed its victory over death. Once I reinstated the heart's supremacy, all you have to do is to accept and to apply its power in your own life and in your own corner of the world. Your heart does not need to work its way back to God, for it never left God. The heart, in its perfection, is the one connection with your Creator which was never severed. But it must regain its certainty as master over illusion. All miracles happen that way. The heart is the bringer of all miracles. Do not ever underestimate the power of the heart to bring forth a higher intelligence, a higher awareness, and greater solutions to existence than you would ever have anticipated. This is why so many times people will experience a miracle of healing in the face of death. Because in the face of death, they go ahead and let the structures die. They think, I only have 6 weeks to live, and then let go of external demands. The mind loses all importance, and loved ones become more dear than ever. All of a sudden, the heart fire burns brightly, whether through grief, joy, contentment, or resignation. Only then, through the fire of the heart, is a miracle possible. Most people facing death go ahead and die to the world of structure, and then at last they really live. That is what I meant when I said you must die first in order to live. Because when you live in the heart, you live immortally. You live eternally. His enlightenment about the heart and its miracles brought back a special memory which I had not recalled in years. Back in 1981, I was in New York City under contract with my publisher to make fine art prints. In those days, Brian and I were wanting to adopt a puppy, and our hearts were set on a wire hair fox terrier. Since there were several excellent kennels for that breed in New York City, we decided that I should proceed with the project while I was there. I interviewed several kennel owners by telephone, and there was one I particularly liked. Best of all, she had some puppies available, so I made plans to go and see them. Being a country girl from Texas, I knew very little about the neighborhoods of New York City. So when she gave me her address in the Bronx, nothing triggered in the way of an internal alarm system. I was living downtown and would be traveling cross town during the afternoon rush hour. Considering the time of day, I thought it best not to take a taxi all the way to the Bronx. The subway would probably be quicker. Besides, I always enjoyed the democratic assortment of humanity on the train. The station I entered was near Wall Street, and in that neighborhood the train was characteristically full of well-dressed brokers traveling back to their uptown apartments. I, too, was nicely dressed, and so I comfortably burrowed into my newspaper as I affirmed my smart decision to take the train. At every station, the dress code and demographics would change somewhat. It was fascinating to notice the transformation as the train progressed from one neighborhood to the next. Finally, when we went through the Bronx Tunnel, the scenery changed significantly. There were no more bally shoes and three-piece suits. Instead, there were open-toed sandals, black leather pants, and tattoos. As the train stopped, I saw a sign which read, "Bronx, next 2 stops." Just at that moment, everybody got off the train, and even more strangely, no one entered. As the train took off, there I was, the only person left on the 3 cars which I could see through. It was an eerie feeling being so alone when only a moment before we had been packed like sardines. As we squealed to a stop in the first Bronx station, the doors opened and 6 boys sauntered in, ranging in age from about 12 to 16. As they stepped aboard, they dumped some empty wallets onto the tracks. I presumed they were ditching evidence of their day's work. A cold panic filled me, but something deeper told me to keep still. There was nothing I could do but pray that someone else would board the train or that they would ignore me and sit at the other end. But neither happened. Instead, they sat surrounding me, 2 on each side and the others facing me. We sat there in silence for a minute that felt like an hour, until finally I couldn't contain myself. Oh, what the heck, I thought. This may be my last day on Earth, so I might as well enjoy it. I just looked up and said, "Hi." It broke the ice, and one of them asked in a macho tone, "Where are you from?" Somehow managing to squeeze some words out, I surprised even myself with a deep southern drawl. "I'm from Texas." "You're from Texas?" he mocked. "What are you doing up here?" I cheerfully responded. "I came to get my puppy." Whether it was my enthusiasm or the magic of puppies which relaxed the tough guys into being regular boys, I'll never know. Whatever it was, the whole tone changed from that moment. Of one thing I am sure. Without the command of my heart and the suspension of my mind, the whole event would have resulted in some kind of pain instead of a treasured memory. This would have been a no-win scenario for mental maneuvering, for I was on their turf. If I had shown even the slightest sense of judgment through emotional reaction or fear, they would have noticed and used it to justify some kind of hostile action toward me. On the obvious level of our encounter, I was clearly at a disadvantage. The mind could not have penetrated that problem, for any mental projection I might have made would have been seized by them for their benefit. Fortunately, the heart is not confined to the dramas and deadlocks of mortal conflict. As Jesus said, the heart always brings new life to any situation and opens up possibilities that would have been impossible without it. Sometimes a 1% change is enough to make all the difference, because that's all it takes to reposition a situation which seems to be absolute and to demonstrate that it actually is a relativity. Only God is absolute. All else is relative. That's why a man who judges becomes imprisoned within the deadlocks of his mind. The blind spot which generates this self-destruct mechanism is that the mind formulates its control around the factors it considers to be absolute, and yet it cannot comprehend the one and only absolute there is. This is why I stress to you that the mind is a brilliant servant, but a fatal master. Before you build it, you must know how to unplug it. Fortunately, on that day I unplugged it. Without conscious intention, I shifted into some kind of overdrive which placed higher faculties and resources in command. The boys and I proceeded to make small talk about puppies, and soon one of them became curious about why I would come all the way to New York to get a puppy. Well, I'm an artist, and I'm up here to do some work. The eyes of one boy lit up brightly as he said, I'm an artist. And two others responded in unison, He's good, too. What kind of art do you do? I asked. He pointed out the window at all the graffiti and thumped his chest like Tarzan. I did that. For the first time in my life, I had a positive response to graffiti. It was an amazing feat of self-expression. More than that, I cannot begin to express the relief I felt in discovering a second subject which we had in common. All I could think to say was, do you know how many artists would give their right arm to have that much work on display in New York City? He beamed. We were becoming friends, and they were relaxing into being boys. They wanted to know where my studio was, where I was staying, and Manuel asked me to give him art lessons. I agreed. If I'm here long enough, I'd be happy to. Actually, I think you could teach me a thing or two about getting public exposure. Then one of them asked me if I had any pictures of my art. Before I could catch myself, I had opened my purse and pulled out my wallet. I started to flinch when I realized what I had done. Oh, what the heck. I just pulled the pictures out and passed them around. They were impressed, and I felt a sense of ease among us. We were like a bunch of kids at summer camp, talking about kid stuff, puppies, and art. Then suddenly one of them blurted out, Don't you know it's not safe for you to be down here? I replied innocently that, where I came from in Texas, most everywhere is safe. One of the oldest boys scolded, Well, somebody had better take care of you up here. We'll walk you to your taxi. When we got off, I felt like Guinevere escorted by her Knights of the Round Table. The taxi driver, who seemed to know the group of boys, grimaced when he saw us coming. Once I was in the car, he asked, Are you all right, lady? Yes, I'm just fine. Then he proceeded to chastise me, stressing in several different ways and languages, Don't you ever do that again. As I sat there reviewing the events of the afternoon, I silently agreed that I should not be so naive in the future. I also thought that, if by accident I ever did find myself in a similar situation, I hoped I would handle it in just the same way. I never saw the boys again, but there will always be a place for them in my heart. When I got through telling this story to Jesus, his eyes were welled with tears. I said, I didn't mean to make you sad. He replied, You didn't make me sad. I remember the event very well, and I was extremely proud of you and the boys. I'm very sentimental about moments when people's lives are changed.